When my nephew called me a charity case in front of his wife's entire family inside the Lakehouse I built with my own hands, I didn't say a single word. I just reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and made one quiet call. You'll want to stay for what happened next. My name is Gerald, and I'm 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a project manager for a construction firm out of Hamilton, Ontario. I wasn't rich by any stretch, but I was careful with what I earned. My wife, Louise, and we lived modestly, saved consistently, and somewhere in our early 50s we bought a piece of land up near Muskoka, about 3 hours north of the city, tucked along the edge of a small lake that barely showed up on most maps. We called it the Birch Point property. Nothing fancy. A 2-bedroom cottage, a wood stove, a dock that needed replacing every few years. Louise picked out the curtains herself, yellow ones, with little white daisies on them. She said a lake house needed color to feel alive in the winter. Louise passed away 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, caught too late. The Birch Point property became something different after that. It stopped being a vacation spot and became the place I went when I needed to feel close to her again. I'd sit on the dock with my coffee in the morning and watch the mist come off the water, and I'd talk to her sometimes out loud when no one was around. I'm not embarrassed to admit that. She would have done the same for me. I have one sibling, my younger sister, Diane. She lives in Mississauga with her husband, Ron. They have one son, my nephew, Kyle. Kyle is 34 years old. He's the kind of person who, when you first meet him, you think, this kid has everything going for him. He's charming, well-spoken, knows how to read a room. But if you look just a little bit closer, you start to notice that the charm is always pointed at something, at an outcome, at a benefit. He'd been doing it since he was a teenager, saying exactly the right things to exactly the right people at exactly the right moments, and somehow always ending up on the comfortable side of every situation. When Louise was sick, Kyle came around often. He'd bring flowers, offer to drive her to appointments, sit with her, and ask about her childhood. I thought it was genuine. Maybe some of it was. But after she passed, the visits slowed, then stopped almost entirely. What didn't stop were the calls. Kyle had a habit of calling when things got tight. Lost his job at a marketing agency in Toronto, called me. His car needed major work, called me. He and his wife, Amber, wanted to consolidate some debt before a big move, called me. I helped. Each time I helped. Not because I was naive, but because Diane is my sister, and Kyle is her son, and that's what family does. Louise would have said the same thing, but Louise also would have known when enough was enough, and she would have told me so clearly. I didn't have her to tell me anymore. Over the past 2 years, I had lent Kyle just over $22,000. I use the word lent loosely. There were conversations about repayment. There were even a few texts where he said, I'll get it sorted by spring, or things are picking up. I won't forget this. But the money never came back, and I stopped expecting it. I adjusted my own plans accordingly, scaled back a small renovation I'd been considering, pushed back a trip I'd promised myself to the Maritimes. I told myself it was fine, that the money was gone, but the relationship remained. Last September, I decided to head up to Birch Point for a week on my own. I try to go at least 3 times a year, spring, midsummer, and early fall. The fall trip is my favorite. The maples turn along the shoreline, the bugs are gone, and there's usually not another soul on the water. I hadn't told anyone I was going up. Not Diane, not Kyle, not any of the neighbors. I don't explain my movements. It's my property. I left Hamilton on a Thursday morning, stopped for gas and a coffee in Barrie, and made it to the turnoff by early afternoon. The access road to Birch Point winds through about 2 kilometers of second-growth forest before the cottage comes into view. As I came around the last bend, I slowed down automatically, the way you do when something feels wrong but you can't name it yet. There were vehicles in the driveway, 2 of them, an SUV with Quebec plates and a newer pickup truck I didn't recognize. The dock had folding chairs set up on it. There were people out there. I could hear something, music or voices or both, carrying across the water. I sat in my truck for a moment with the engine running. I drove the rest of the way up slowly and parked off to the side. I climbed out and walked toward the cottage. The front door was propped open with what turned out to be one of my own firewood logs. Inside, I could see grocery bags on the counter and what looked like someone's coat draped over Louise's rocking chair. I walked around to the back deck. There were 6 people sitting around the table and down on the dock. An older couple I didn't know, a younger woman with red hair, a man around Kyle's age who turned out to be a friend, and Kyle himself, leaning back in my Adirondack chair, the one Louise gave me for Father's Day before we had any children, And just because she said I was fatherly by nature, holding a bottle of Molson and laughing at something the older man had said, he saw me and the laugh stopped. Not completely. He adjusted it into something smaller, more controlled, but I saw it go out of his eyes. Uncle Gerald, he said. What are you doing here? That sentence landed oddly. What are you doing here? In my own yard, at my own lake house. I could ask you the same thing, I said. The older man, who I would learn in the next 30 seconds was Amber's father. Michel, from Gatineau, stood up with the easy friendliness of someone who didn't yet understand the situation. He extended his hand and introduced himself in English with a French accent and said what a beautiful property it was, that Kyle had mentioned it many times and he was so glad to finally see it. Kyle stood up too now, and there was something happening on his face that I recognized. He was calculating, figuring out which version of the story to use. We thought you weren't coming up until October, he said. I changed my plans, I said. When did you get here? Just yesterday, he said. Just a few days. Amber's parents drove down from Gatineau and we wanted to show them the lake. I was going to call you. Were you? Amber appeared from inside the cottage. She was carrying a tray with glasses on it and she stopped when she saw me. She had the grace to look embarrassed, which I respected. Mr. Beaumont, she said quietly. We didn't think you'd be up until... I know, I said. He told me. Michel, Amber's father, was still smiling, but it was thinning. He was a perceptive man. He could feel the temperature. His wife, sitting on the dock below, had stopped whatever she was doing and was watching. I turned to Kyle. Can I speak with you for a moment? We walked around to the side of the cottage, away from everyone. The birch trees were just starting to turn there. Louise had loved that particular stand of birches. She said they looked like they were lit from inside when the afternoon hit them right. Kyle, I said, I need you to explain this to me. It's not a big deal, he said, and his voice had shifted into the smooth register he used when he was managing something. We just needed a place for a few days. I knew you weren't coming up and I didn't think you'd mind. Amber's parents haven't seen the lake and we've been trying to plan this for months. And you didn't think to ask me. I was going to call, but you didn't. He ran his hand through his hair. Uncle Gerald, come on. It's practically the family cottage. That phrase. Practically the family cottage. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said. It isn't. Louise and I bought this land in 2009. We paid for every board and every shingle and every piece of insulation in that building. It belongs to me. It is not the family cottage. He changed angles then. He told me I was being rigid. That family didn't keep score. That Louise would have wanted people to enjoy the property, wouldn't she? She was a warm person. She wouldn't have wanted it sitting empty while he was trying to show his wife's family a good time. Bringing Louise into it was the wrong move. I felt something close very quietly in my chest. We went back around to the deck. I think Kyle thought he'd managed it. I think he expected I would accept some version of the situation and sit down and have a beer and let it go. And maybe 6 months ago I would have. But I was standing on my dock, in front of people I had never met, and my nephew had just used my dead wife's name to justify helping himself to my home without asking. Amber's father stood up again when we came around the corner. He could see from my face that whatever had been said around the side of the cottage had not resolved things. He said, quietly and with real dignity, Kyle, perhaps we should make other arrangements. That's when Kyle did the thing that changed everything. He turned to his father-in-law with the smooth, reflexive confidence of someone who had talked his way out of 100 situations, and he said, gesturing at me, Don't worry about it, Michelle. He's not usually like this. He's been having a hard time since his wife died. He just needs a moment. He just needs a moment. Something about the way he said it, like I was a child being managed, like I was an embarrassment, like I was an obstacle. I felt it go through me like cold water. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move toward him. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. What are you doing? Kyle said. I didn't answer. I found the number I was looking for and pressed call. It rang twice. Then my lawyer, Patricia Chen, picked up. Patricia is a real estate and estate lawyer in Hamilton. She's represented me for 15 years. She has a no-nonsense quality I've always appreciated. Gerald, she said. What can I do for you? Patricia, I said, and I made sure my voice was steady and clear. I'm at the Birch Point property. I have some people here who are using the cottage without my permission. I'd like to know what my options are. There was a brief pause. Then Patricia said in her very even way, Your options are straightforward. It's your property, you have title, and any occupants who are there without a written agreement or your verbal consent are trespassing. You can ask them to leave, and if they don't, you can call the OPP. Thank you, I said. I'll be in touch. I ended the call and put the phone back in my pocket. The deck was very quiet. Amber had set the tray down somewhere. Michelle and his wife were looking at Kyle. The friend who'd been there had walked back up from the dock and was hovering near the door with the particular discomfort of someone who knows they're in the middle of something they want no part of. Kyle's face had changed completely. The smoothness was gone. You called a lawyer, he said. You actually called a lawyer. On family. You're in my house without my permission, I said. And you just told your father-in-law that I'm unwell, in front of strangers, on my own property. So yes. Michelle stepped forward. He spoke quietly, in the careful English of someone choosing his words precisely. And he said, Kyle, I think your uncle is right. We should not be here. We should not have come without asking. He turned to me. Mr. Beaumont, I apologize. We were told it was arranged. I understand, I said. I don't hold it against you. They packed up. It took about 45 minutes. I sat on the dock while it happened. I listened to the birds and watched a loon make a long, slow dive and come up much farther out than I expected. I thought about Louise. I thought about what she would have said. I thought she would have said something brisk and sensible and then made a pot of tea. Amber came to find me before they left. She stood at the top of the dock steps and said, I'm sorry, Mr. Beaumont. I want you to know that I didn't know you hadn't approved this. He told me he'd spoken to you. She paused. He told me you said it was fine. That sat in the air between us for a moment. I believe you, I said. Drive safe. Kyle didn't apologize. He walked past me to the driver's side of the pickup, and what he said was, I hope you're happy, and then he drove out down the access road ahead of the SUV. I watched the dust settle after the taillights disappeared into the trees. That evening I made myself dinner, a can of soup and some bread I'd brought from the city, and I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet. Louise's yellow curtains moved a little in the draft from the window I'd cracked. I'd been going over things for months before that moment, honestly. The money, the calls, the way he'd started referring to the property in conversations with other people, as I'd heard secondhand more than once, as the family cottage up in Muskoka, not mine, not Gerald's, the family's, as if possession was a thing that happened through proximity and assumption rather than labor and ownership. I'd been soft about it because he was Diane's son and because I'd loved him when he was small, when he used to come up here as a kid and fish off the dock and fall asleep in the canoe on the way back in. I'd given him the benefit of the doubt for longer than the doubt deserved. The next morning, I called my bank. I spoke with my financial advisor, a practical woman named Sandra, and I walked through the situation with her. I had at that point Kyle listed as a secondary contact on one of my accounts. Not a joint holder, not a beneficiary, but a contact, which had been a convenience measure years ago when Louise was ill. Sandra helped me remove that. I also had a general will on file with Patricia Chen. I called Patricia in the afternoon and asked her to schedule a time to review it. I wasn't acting in anger. I was acting in clarity. There's a difference, and it's important. I also called Diane. That was the hardest call. She's my sister. She's known me her whole life, and I've known her hers. When I told her what happened, there was a long silence on her end, the kind that means she's struggling between what she knows and what she wants to be true. He shouldn't have done that, she said finally. No, I said. He shouldn't. Gerald, he's been going through a hard time. Diane, I said. I know he's been going through a hard time. I've given him $22,000 over the past 2 years because he's been going through a hard time. I am not trying to punish him. I'm telling you what happened, and I'm telling you that it can't continue. Another silence. What are you going to do? I'm going to stop, I said. I'm going to stop lending money that doesn't come back. Stop making my home available to people who don't ask. Stop letting things slide because I don't want a difficult conversation. That's what I'm going to do, she cried a little. I listened. I told her I loved her and that this wasn't about her and that my relationship with her wasn't going anywhere. I meant all of it. I stayed at Birch Point for the full week. Each morning I had my coffee on the dock and watched the mist and talked to Louise a little. I told her what had happened. I told her I thought I'd finally understood something she'd probably been trying to tell me for years. The most important word in a family isn't love. It's honesty. Love without honesty is just a feeling that gets used by whoever needs it most in the moment. Honesty is what makes love into something structural, something that can hold weight. I had loved Kyle without being honest with him about what I expected, about what I was willing to give, about what the limits were. I had told myself that generosity meant no conditions, and I'd confused that with wisdom. It wasn't wisdom. It was avoidance. And avoidance, in the long run, doesn't protect anyone. It just delays the moment when the truth arrives. And truth, when it's delayed too long, doesn't come gently. Kyle called twice the week after I got back. I let both calls go to voicemail. The messages were versions of the same thing, defensive at first, then softer, then asking if we could talk. I didn't respond right away. Not because I was trying to punish him, but because I had nothing new to say yet, and repeating the same things in a different tone doesn't move anything forward. In November, I met him for coffee in Mississauga. A Tim Hortons, neutral ground. He looked tired and, I thought, genuinely chastened. He said he was sorry. He said he'd told himself so many times that the property was basically family that he'd started to believe it. He said he knew now that was wrong. He asked about the $22,000 and whether I wanted to talk about a repayment plan. I said I did. We worked something out that was realistic, modest, monthly amounts that fit what he could actually manage. No interest, no deadline pressure. Not because I needed the money back desperately, but because having a plan meant he was taking it seriously, and me accepting nothing meant I was teaching him that taking from me had no real consequence. I told him I wasn't interested in cutting him out of my life. I told him I was interested in a relationship that was honest about what it was, that had clear edges, clear expectations, clear respect. I told him the door to Birch Point was open to him, genuinely open, but it would require a phone call first, and a yes from me, and that yes would mean something because it would be a choice and not a default. He nodded. He looked at the table for a moment, then he said, "I think I've been taking advantage of the fact that you're a good person and you don't make a lot of noise about it." That was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. Maybe ever. I drove home along the 403 as the first real snow of the season came down, the soft, tentative kind that doesn't stick yet but makes the world look like it's considering something. I thought about Louise the way I always do on that drive. I thought about what she would have said about all of it. She would have said I should have done this years ago. She would have said it with a smile, not unkindly. And she would have been right. What I know now, at 67, after everything, raising money, losing people, building things with my hands and my savings and my years, is this. Being generous with the people you love is a beautiful thing. But generosity that asks nothing, expects nothing, and says nothing when it's taken for granted is not generosity at all. It's just a quiet way of disappearing. I stopped disappearing. And somehow, in the space that left behind, something more real had a chance to start.